Hello, everyone. This is Calvin Hendryx-Parker for Gestalt IT. I am joined with Rob Whiteley from NGINX. We just got done with the NGINX Sprint 2.0. Rob, why don't you go ahead and give yourself a quick introduction?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Rob Whiteley. I'm the general manager of the NGINX business unit here at F5.
That's awesome. We just wrapped up the Sprint 2.0. What an awesome event. This year's event was a great follow-on to last year. I felt like there's a lot of engagement there. One of the things I took away from this event, though, was a re-emergence of the focus on open source. Do you want to talk about or kind of summarize some of those open source commitments that you made during the event?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Calvin. So absolutely, there is an explicit and hopefully transparent commitment we're trying to make around open source. And if I kind of explain where we are in the journey a little bit, NGINX is almost in its third chapter, right? For the first chapter, we were a standalone company. The open source was thriving, and we were really trying to figure out how do we make a company of this. I think the second chapter, we released our first commercial product. We became a venture-backed startup, and it was really about proving that we had a viable business. But what the community cares about is just, hey, what about that great open source that got you here in the first place? And so in this third chapter, now that we're part of a larger company, we have more resource, we can invest more in trying to bring great open source tech. That's really kind of what is our focus and what we try to announce or talk about at Sprint. To your point, there's kind of a handful of commitments. So one is we have an amazing community of users that swap stories on how to tune NGINX and configure it. But if they want to contribute code, it's candidly a little difficult at times because NGINX is such a mature project, and it is so tightly written and it's very compact. Well, we want to make a commitment that moving forward, we'll do a better job of engaging with a community of contributors, not just users, right? People that want to give back in the form of code or documentation, or even if there's just a better ecosystem to swap things like scripts and configs. So that, I think, is our first. And so I think you'll find NGINX will show up a lot more in the community than we have over the last couple of years. So that's the first one. The second thing that I want to commit to is just making sure we're not putting tech out for tech out's sake. It's innovative. We are trying to push the needle. We've spent a lot of time as a proxy in particular, working in some of the gnarliest networks and some of the biggest hyperscale companies. And we've learned a lot about how modern applications are plumbed and how to make that a better experience for enterprises that maybe aren't a Google or a Facebook. And so there's innovation that we still want to do at the proxy level. And we've set a very specific North Star to make sure that we leapfrog the current state of the market. And I think you'll see a lot from us this calendar year, over the next calendar year, 12 months, not by January. That would be a bit much. And then the third thing I'll just say quickly is the other thing I always worry about with the community is that they get started with NGINX, but then for fear of hitting a paywall, they'll abandon the technology. And so we just want to be super clear about where that paywall exists, and give confidence to developers in particular that if you're building an application, you will not bump up against that paywall. The capability you'll need to prototype the application, get it running in production are there. What we want to do separately is if you're scaling it in production, if you're an SRE that is trying to worry about more advanced observability or tracing, maybe then a commercial version makes more sense. But we don't want to stall earlier in the application lifecycle. So hopefully that makes sense.
Oh yeah, totally. And you could feel the kind of infusion of engineering talent that has gone into the last 18 months of the product. It feels like you're really benefiting from all the things F5 kind of brought to the table as NGINX. And it seems like you produced a lot of tools during that time frame. What's going to happen in the next, say, year or 18 months with all those tools?
Yeah, great question. And to even put some numbers to it, when we as NGINX showed up, I like to say on planet F5, there was probably about 250 employees, half of them engineers. We more than doubled the engineering force overnight when we closed the acquisition, because there was a group within F5 that was working on similar tech that we merged into what is now our business unit. And so when you double the number of engineers you have at your disposal, you're going to just about double the number of products you create, because we're engineers. We love to build. We want to put great tech out there. And so we kind of went through this golden renaissance of new product, and it was a great heyday for putting tools out there. Well, now I think what we need to do is look at rationalizing that a little bit. And I don't mean that in a bad way, that the technology will live on, but maybe they don't have to be 3-point tools. Maybe it's one solution, right? Like I'll give you, for instance, an ingress controller, an API gateway, and a service mesh are all 3 different products, but they all orbit the same basic Kubernetes environment. And so are there ways that we can begin to rationalize that, but more importantly, working with the Kubernetes community, with the Gateway API SIG networking group, or even with the ingress, to make sure that we're doing that in a way that extends what's already there, and that we're not just putting yet another tool on the market.
Right. And you even mentioned during the sprint greater engagement with the Kubernetes community and becoming part of the foundation that's involved there. What can people expect from that?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that we are very fortunate is that NGINX was selected early on by the Kubernetes community to be the default ingress controller. And so, you know, it's sort of packaged up with Kubernetes. And so it's the batteries included, for lack of a better analogy. But one of the things we decided early on in our time was, let's put our own open source version of an ingress controller out there, as well as a version that then builds on the commercial product, NGINX Plus. Now what we're seeing is that a lot of users are confused about which version they're using, and is there an upgrade path between the two. So our primary motivation in joining the community was to begin to merge those efforts. Exactly what that looks like, that's for the community to decide. We just want to help with input and guide it, and then more importantly, contribute the expertise in the code. But if we decide that, hey, there's some things that we can do to maybe tighten up some of the modules that have been put into NGINX that act as an ingress, you know, I would say we're probably the best on the planet at doing that. So why don't we lend that expertise to the community instead of trying to put a rival version out, if you will?
Right.
So that's really our goal, is just get to a point where a rising tide is lifting all boats, and we're not just trying to pursue separate paths.
I love that attitude about it. And speaking of kind of community and giving back, you also released the reference architecture for the NGINX and Kubernetes like mesh architecture, and basically put it out for solicitation for the community to give feedback and pull requests. That's pretty cool. And how did that come about?
Yeah, it came about because we had a lot of customers who were saying, hey, when we pull down Kubernetes and we're setting up NGINX as an ingress, there seems to be a lot of kind of institutional knowledge you need to have on how to tune it, every last parameter. And so we really started out with a not very ambitious goal of, let's just have an opinionated kind of best practice ingress configuration. And we said, okay, well, for that to be most helpful, we should probably package that up with Kubernetes so that you don't have to worry about installing it. And then we quickly realized, well, to do that, you're going to need to probably connect this to an infrastructure as code, something to help lay down all this. Well, we'll probably need an automation tool like Ansible. Well, and if we're doing that, we better integrate with the code repository. So next thing you know, we had this kind of complex set of about 15 to 20 components that comprise a modern application stack. And we said, okay, well, let's continue. Let's plumb this together, as I said earlier, and bring this to a point where a user that wants to get started with Kubernetes can pull down this reference architecture as code, deploy it in minutes, and start learning about how it works, as opposed to spending weeks or months trying to get it to a working state, which is, I think, one of the things that is holding back a lot of these platform teams from really diving in with both feet to Kubernetes. So just removing any friction we can. Now, to your point, we're just one company. We would love to we made it modular from the get-go so that others can contribute. If you don't want to use Pulumi as the infrastructure orchestration, then sub in Terraform. Help us write that module and the corresponding code to pull it in, merge it back. And so we basically just want the reference architecture to be that opinionated viewpoint with, for lack of a better term, a pick list that allows you to say, okay, well, I want choices A, B, D, and F, and then boom, that'll be your particular flavor when you pull it down to run it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great position to be in, is trying to give that opinions to the community on how this should go. I know getting started with Kubernetes is not, it's a daunting task, or could be a daunting task. And being able to simplify it down to, like you said, a pick list of choices makes getting started easier. And you guys have built a set of tools around this ecosystem, and not just another platform, that another thing I can just launch this basically Kubernetes under the covers. It's like, we're going to support the Kubernetes community with these tools. I love that approach to this. So what's coming up over the next year? I mean, what can we look forward to in the products?
Sure. So we're definitely going to continue with the reference architecture. The commitment to open source is really something that I think we need to show, not tell. So expect from us to put some very specific projects. Kind of candidly, we were up until the very last minute going to announce 2 very specific projects. If you were kind of paying attention, we instead just hinted at them coming. And the reason is we decided it didn't meet a bar that we needed to meet in terms of the documentation is there day one, the code is in GitHub day one for you to pull down. And so rather than, again, just telling people about it, we want to wait the few months till we have it ready. But we have some really cool things we're doing around service mesh, and some really cool things we're doing around managing large fleets of NGINX that we think will be powerful in the open source community. So those are 2, I think, on the short-term horizon. And then otherwise, I think our biggest thing is, how do we just participate with more of the vendors in the ecosystem, whether it's with the reference architecture or not. To your point, Kubernetes is infinitely powerful in its flexibility, but then infinitely complex if you allow it to go that route. So we just want to make sure that we're doing, what we can to plug into whether it's, OpenShift, Rancher, maybe, any of the cloud native versions. Each one is a little different, and we want to make sure that we don't leave that up to the reader, if you will.
Right. That makes sense. Well, that's awesome. I look forward to Sprint 3.0 next year. Any
Yeah.
final thoughts or last words you want to leave with the viewers?
No, just hope you enjoyed it. If you didn't get a chance, you can certainly, first of all, if you're registered, it's going to be on demand on the platform. If you didn't register for Sprint, you can just head over to nginx.com, and you'll see right away that it's easy to pop into the platform. And we hope to see you all either on demand or, better yet, live at next year's event.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Calvin.